One of the shortest stories in the Bible is a brief tale about the hero Samson that spans just 3 verses in Judges 16. It's about Samson's visit to the Philistine city of Gaza, where he tears the massive doors of the city gate out of their moorings and carries them across the Israelite countryside. Stories with odd details that defy simple explanation always attract my interest, and the weirdness to word ratio of this yarn is pretty darn high. Though brief, it leaves us with interesting questions about the Samson legend and the fortified gates of Gaza that I'd like to examine. There's another reason I chose this story, however. As Hebrew Bible professor Jack Sasson points out in a recent paper, Samson's bizarre stunt raises the question of whether such stories were always meant to be taken as fact by the audience. If, like me, you were raised to believe that all Bible stories are written as serious historical narratives, the truth might surprise you. First, a bit of background. Judges 13 tells the story of a barren woman from the tribe of Dan who encounters the angel of Yahweh and is promised a child. Soon afterward, she becomes pregnant and bears a boy whom she names Samson. The next 2 chapters describe an escalating feud between grown-up Samson and the Philistines in the vicinity of Ashkelon. Samson performs a series of heroic exploits that start with him killing a lion and end with him massacring 1,000 Philistine warriors using a donkey jawbone as his weapon. Almost every time Samson fights, the Spirit of Yahweh is said to rush upon him. This is important, for it implies that Yahweh is directing Samson's actions. In the course of these events, the Philistines also murder Samson's wife, the first of several tragic twists in his story. The narrative seems to end in Judges 15:20, with a concluding remark saying that Samson judged Israel for 20 years. Most of us associate the name Samson with a character who is incredibly muscular and strong. But although Samson is clearly a formidable fighter in these chapters, it is never actually stated that he possesses supernatural strength or other unique physical qualities. Rather, his victories in the face of unsurmountable odds always appeared to involve direct assistance from Yahweh. Chapter 16 resumes the story of Samson, but its place in the timeline is unclear. It starts out like a flashback, but ends with Samson's death in Philistine captivity. Here is the episode about his first visit to Gaza in full. Now, Samson went to Gaza, and there he saw a woman, a prostitute, and he went in to her. And it was reported to the Gazaites, "Samson has come here." So they surrounded him, and they lay in ambush for him in the gate of the city the entire night. They kept still all night, saying, "In the morning, as soon as there is light, we will kill him." Now Samson lay until midnight. At midnight he rose and grasped the doors of the city gate and the 2 doorposts and pulled them out, bar and all. And placing them all on his shoulders, took them up to the top of the hill that is opposite Hebron. Gaza was a major urban center and part of the Philistine heartland. Samson's reason for visiting is not explained, and the timing of his visit is unclear. Hillel Milgrim, in his book on Judges, notes that in the previous chapters, Samson is described as going down to Philistine territory from the Israelite hill country. Here, however, he simply goes to Gaza. The difference in wording suggests that he is already somewhere in Philistine territory. However, as Sasson points out, nothing directly links this episode to earlier events or to the story of Delilah that follows. Samson reaches Gaza incognito, but after he visits the prostitute, his presence becomes known. The Hebrew text is extremely terse. Translated literally, it just says, to the Gazaites, "Samson has come here." The Old Greek version adds the words, "It was reported." By whom and to whom it was reported is not obvious. Most commentators assume that Samson's female companion reported him to the city guard, which apparently had orders to kill him on sight. Why do they not go and kill Samson immediately? As Milgrim observes, there was no street lighting in ancient cities. Without moonlight, the streets would be pitch black, and in a fight, one was as likely to dispatch one's friend as one's enemy. Sensibly then, Samson's enemies hide in the city gate, where they plan to wait for dawn. The gate was a massive fortified complex at least 2 stories tall with flanking towers, and it contained guard rooms that could be used for an ambush. It was a bottleneck that funneled all pedestrian traffic in and out of the city. Samson apparently learns that he is in danger, though the story does not tell us how. His decision to leave at midnight foils the plans of his would-be attackers. When he reaches the barred gate, he rips both doors right out of the stonework along with their doorposts and the bar, and carries them on his shoulders all the way to a hill near Hebron. Importantly, as Richard D. Nelson observes in his commentary, neither Yahweh nor the Spirit plays any role here. Emphasis rests on Samson's sexual drive, his superhuman strength, and the ineptitude of the Philistines. So while previous chapters gave the Spirit of Yahweh a direct role in Samson's abilities, this story does not. It's hard for a modern reader who has no daily experience with Near Eastern walled cities to appreciate the enormity of Samson's feat, so I'd like to explain the design of city gates in more detail. Although ancient Gaza has not been properly excavated for political reasons, we know from the ruins of similar cities and a likely depiction of the city on a relief of Sargon II that the main gate would have consisted of 2 doors, a total of 10 to 12 feet wide and about the same in height. The doors would have been made from pine, acacia, or cypress wood up to 30 inches thick. They would have been covered with bronze plating or bands to add strength and to prevent torching. The doors had posts set into sockets that were built into the stonework and masonry of the arch-shaped gateway. A large horizontal bar would have been used to lock the doors at night. I estimate that doors of such size would have weighed roughly 2,000 kilograms, if not more. Obviously, no human who has ever lived could have carried such staggeringly massive doors. In fact, later Jewish tradition would address this problem by explaining that Samson must have been a giant with shoulders 90 feet wide. No less impressive is the trek to Hebron. Although the text is vague about where exactly Samson places the doors, Hebron is 37 miles east of Gaza and almost 3,000 feet higher in elevation. That's at least a 2-day journey on a well-maintained road, and several days over rougher terrain, without even taking into account Samson's load. Some exegetes have sought to find a closer hill for Samson to set down his burden, but Sasson remarks that, given the other circumstances of Samson's behavior in Gaza, turning pragmatic here would be missing the drift of the anecdote. There's no agreement on where this story comes from, or why it was included in the Samson narrative. Given the other parallels between Samson's exploits and the Greek legend of Heracles, some scholars have proposed a link between Heracles and this story as well. Robert Carl News believes it might be inspired by a well-known legend in which Heracles erected 2 pillars on either side of the Strait of Gibraltar. Another theory was proposed by Hungarian scholar Ignác Goldziher in the 19th century. He believed that an obscure myth about Heracles fighting Hades at the gates of the netherworld was the background for this story. Robin Baker takes a different approach, suggesting that the west-to-east journey from Gaza to Hebron recalls the path of the sun taken through the netherworld at night. He bases this theory on the fact that the name Samson is derived from Shamash, the Mesopotamian sun god. Other connections between Samson and the sun include his 20-year judgeship, with 20 being the sacred number of Shamash, the fact that he is based near Beth Shemesh, which means Temple of the Sun, and his long hair, which echoes the sun's rays. Although links between Samson and the sun are acknowledged by quite a few scholars, Baker is alone for now in his interpretation of this particular episode. There is more general agreement that the story could have originated to explain a local rock formation near Hebron that resembled an upright city gate. The same logic is at work in the story of Lot's wife turning into a pillar of salt, which was almost certainly inspired by the unusual geological formations of the Dead Sea region. Likewise, the Pillars of Heracles myth is a clear etiology for the 2 promontories that flank the Strait of Gibraltar, the Rock of Gibraltar on the European side, and either Monte Hacho or Jebel Musa in Africa. Though these possible origins are fun to explore, we still have to deal with the narrative in its final form. If we interpret the story literally, the sheer implausibility of the caper and the superhuman strength it would require raise an interesting question. Does the author expect his audience to believe the story really happened? This brings me to Jack Sasson's observations about the plausibility of Bible stories. In general, of course, the original audience was expected to believe that the characters in these stories carried out the actions described in the text. This was especially true if the story involved direct acts of God, such as the creation of the world, the flood, or the parting of the Red Sea. After all, these are the sorts of things a deity can do. However, Sasson identifies two types of stories that are less straightforward. One is the embellished tale, which involves a flesh and blood person performing actions that are essentially plausible, but includes details that are exaggerated or highly unlikely. Samson killing 1,000 Philistines with a donkey jawbone is one example he gives. The reader can accept that Samson fought off a group of Philistines, but both the number of dead and the weapon of choice seem unlikely. Another example is the story of Moses' spies in Canaan in Numbers 13. We can overlook the gargantuan grapes they bring back and accept the overall premise of scouting out the promised land. Sasson writes, "In hearing or reading such stories, the discerning mind automatically trims them down to their proper balance, permitting focus on the intended lesson." A bigger problem is what Sasson calls tall tales. These are stories so implausible even an ancient reader would have been suspicious. Sasson writes, "In antiquity, any Samson reader acquainted with fortified cities would know that city gates, not least because of their size, bulk, and weight, were not transportable on the back of any one individual, however mighty. For such gates were neither graspable by one pair of arms, nor easily balanced on a human back." Sasson adds that by having Samson carry the gate all the way to Hebron, many miles from Gaza and uphill the whole way, the narrator all but guarantees that readers will doubt the story. Sasson also points out that the narrator has declined to involve God in this particular exploit, so readers cannot fall back on the explanation of divine supernatural strength. The Talmud's solution of making Samson a colossal giant is hardly convincing either. The point here is not to debate the historicity of the story, but to realize that Bible authors sometimes indulged in fanciful anecdotes on purpose, and used a variety of tactics to alert perceptive readers. Another way of tipping off the audience to such stories, Sasson says, was to give characters names with deliberate wordplay and humor. One example he provides is the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis 14, whose names mean in evil and in wickedness, respectively. Modern storytellers still do this, of course. If a film has characters with names like Cruella de Vil or Dr. Evil, it's probably not a historical documentary. The tale of Samson and the Gate of Gaza urges us, says Sasson, to consider the probability that, on a few occasions, biblical traditions did strive to convey instruction that offered sharper lessons than those derived from history. Sasson argues that the story of Samson and Judges contains two different sets of traditions, one comprising chapters 13 to 15, and the other chapter 16. Each concludes with a statement about Samson's 20 years as judge, but they differ in how Samson is depicted. The story of the Gate of Gaza was needed in order to introduce the second set of traditions, establishing Samson's character as a comic hero with a supersized ego, defiant, conflicted about authority, not always self-aware, but in full control of destiny. Only with this reintroduction to Samson's character can we fully appreciate the playful overconfidence he displays toward Delilah, teasing her about the source of his strength as some kind of perverse erotic escapade, and his final victory in which he returns to Gaza a prisoner and collapses the Temple of Dagon on the heads of his captors. Are there any other Bible stories you think might be deliberate tall tales? Let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching.
Sir, Samson is here in Gaza with a woman of the night, just as we suspected.
Very good. Lock the city gates. We'll arrest him in the morning.
Stay until morning?
Not tonight.